dog ears, cracked spine, deckled edges. Oh my! Today we are doing the in and out book tag. I was tagged by Courtney over at Courtney Reads. I will have her channel linked in the description. And this is basically a tag of a bunch of bookish tropes and things and seeing if you like it or you don't like it, if you're in for reading it or if you're out and don't want to read about it. I will start off this tag by tagging several other booktubers that you should definitely check out. I am tagging Kelly from Cozy Reader Kelly, Amanda and Rachel from the Book Mavens, Ryan from Seeking Stories, and Chloe from Chloe Frizzle. And with that, let's get into the book tag. The first one is reading the last page first. And I'm going to go with a solid in-between on this one. I don't do this anymore, but I used to. I pretty much stopped doing this whenever I started reading a lot more ebooks and audiobooks because it's a lot harder to flip to the last page whenever I am reading an ebook or an audiobook. But whenever I used to only read physical books, I wouldn't read the whole last page, but I'd read like the last sentence or the last word. I don't know why I did this, but it was just something I liked doing. And it's not really something I do anymore. The next one is enemies to lovers. And I'm going to say in with a large caveat. So I don't pick up books because they are enemies to lovers stories. I will pick up books that have enemies to lovers in them, but like I'm interested in the whole rest of the story, not necessarily the enemies to lovers part. And I don't think enemies to lovers is always done well. So what I really don't like about enemies to lovers is if it is I hate him, I hate his guts, but he's really attractive. But I hate him, but he's attractive. What I like is when two people who maybe don't like each other have to work together, and then they find out, hey, maybe you're not so bad, maybe we could be friends, maybe, you know, I had misconceptions about you previously. Actually, I'm kind of starting to get attracted to you. Slow burn enemies to lovers is where it's at. Next one is dream sequences, and I don't know that I've read that many dream sequences. I feel like this is more of like a movie or TV trope. Am I wrong about that? I'm gonna say in because it seems fine. Like I don't have any issues with it. So yeah, why not? Books with dream sequences. I'm really trying to think of any. Next is love triangles, and I'm going to say out with a caveat. I don't prefer love triangles. I prefer if love triangles are not in the story. But I won't not read a book because there's a love triangle in it. As long as I'm interested in the rest of the story, I'm fine reading a book that has a love triangle in it. Unless the entire book is about the love triangle. Then I don't care. Next one is cracked spines and in between, solid in between. I don't crack the spines on my own books. This isn't something I typically do. It isn't something I enjoy doing, but I don't care if I'm reading a book with a cracked spine. I'm fine picking up books secondhand and owning them that have cracked spines. Like, I don't care if you want to crack your spine. I'm not horrified by this. I'm fine if like books are beat up and they're still enjoyable to read. The story's still there. I don't know if this is any at all interesting. I feel like I'm so in between on all of these. The next is Back to My Small Town, which I read a lot of fantasy. So usually we start in the small town and we go elsewhere. So if you know a fantasy book that is like a Back to My Small Town book, I want to read it. I think that sounds great. The closest I can think of, but it's not like My Small Town, it's just like a small town, is Legends and Lattes, where Viv has been out adventuring and she decides to settle down in a small town. And I really enjoyed that story, so that's kind of what I'm thinking of. But yeah, most fantasy books are the other way, where they just go off on an adventure and leave the small town behind. Next is Monsters Are Regular People, and I'm so in on this one. I love exploring the human experience and exploring what humans are capable of. I want to know what makes people tick, you know? What makes people do what they do. So absolutely, and I love exploring this side of things. That said, I do typically like exploring this type of things in fantasy because sometimes if you think about it too long in the real world, it can just get depressing. I really hope this is recording. I ain't gonna double check that right this second. Yes, we are recording. Okay, we're good. Next is no paragraph breaks, and I am so out. I am so out, okay? I need page breaks whenever we're done a scene. I need page breaks all the time. I will like flip ahead and go, oh, I only have to read like another page and a half before I stop. And then I flip ahead again and go, oh, only another 2 pages. And I actually read more pages that way. Whereas if it's like I have to read another 10 pages before there's a breaking point, then, or another 20 pages or 50 pages, whatever it is, I'm going to put the book down instead of just reading a couple more pages. So I actually read books faster if I have like more frequent scene breaks and chapter breaks and paragraph breaks. Next is multi-generational sagas, and I absolutely love the idea of this one, but I haven't really read very many. Can we have like multi-generational sagas in fantasy, please? Because I did read a historical fiction multi-generational saga that was very impactful for me whenever I was a teenager. And that's what I'm thinking of. It's like, I found that so impactful, and I would love to read more stories like that. So if you have multi-generational saga recommendations of any genre, leave them in the comments because I would love to check them out. I'd love to read more books like this. But especially if you have some that have some sort of magical element in it, that would be amazing. Next is rereading, and I am a huge rereader. I used to never reread books, which is kind of crazy to say because I love rereading books now. I reread so much, but I mean, growing up, I was just like, I already know what happens and I need to get to the next book as fast as possible. There's so many books out there, I can't explore them all. And now I love re-exploring a book that I've already read, getting to see the story differently, getting to see it deeper, maybe pick up stuff I missed the first time. And I also love just coming back to comforting reads. Next is artificial intelligence. And I'm gonna say out on this one. I do kind of struggle to get into science fiction, and one of the things that I do struggle with is the artificial intelligence aspect of it. I don't know why I don't like sentient robot stories. I want to give it a try again because it's been a long time since I've actually tried reading sentient robots, but that has been something that I've just like not enjoyed reading in the past, so out. Next is drop caps, which I had to look up what this means, and the only book that I have that has anything resembling a drop cap is, let me flip to a chapter beginning because this happens in chapter beginnings, where we have a large decorative first letter in the chapter. I really hope you can see this. I'm not sure if this is technically a drop cap because some of them that I was looking up are like a lot more illustrated and decorative around the first letter. I don't really have much of a preference on this one. I'm going to say out just because I think it makes the book slightly harder to read because the letter is larger and decorative and not like with the words the way it typically is whenever you read. So anything that makes stuff harder to read, I'm going to be out on, but I don't have a big preference on this. Next is happy endings, and I'm in. But like, give me all the endings. I am good for happy endings, sad endings, bittersweet endings, open endings, all of it. I don't want to read stories that always end the same way. I want to read stories that have a variety of endings, but I enjoy a good happy ending, so in. Next is plot points that only converge at the end, and I don't think I've read very many books like this, but I'm in. Like, I'm fine reading 2 parallel stories that don't really intersect until maybe the very end, or maybe they never do. I think we should write more books like this. I'm in on this. Next is detailed magic systems, and I am out. I do not like detailed magic systems. I don't want to say that. I don't want to say that. Take that back. I prefer soft magic systems. I will read books that have hard magic systems, but I don't care about knowing how the magic works. I do think the author should know how the magic works to keep internal consistency within the story, but I don't need to know how the magic works. In fact, I'd prefer not to and just let the story feel magical and let it unfold. Editing Rebecca here to add, I will still read books with complicated magic systems, but sometimes I skip the long descriptions. Next is classical fantasy races, which I assume means elves, dwarves, trolls, etc. I'm in. I still enjoy good stories with classical fantasy races. I would be fine with other races as well, or other creative takes on this, or mostly human stories in a fantasy world, etc. I'm pretty much good for whatever here. Next is Unreliable Narrators, which I don't think I've read very many stories that like are intentionally setting out as like unreliable narrator stories. Although I do propose that every book that's written in the first person perspective from one single character is inherently somewhat unreliable, because we're only ever seeing the world through that character's point of view. And I think that is really fun to explore and think about. I think that's such a cool thing to like think about, and then it makes you think about your life and how much you are an unreliable narrator because you're only seeing the world through your own eyes. Okay, I'm gonna stop before we get any deeper. This is something I think about a lot, but I'll spare you. Next is Evil Protagonist, and I'm gonna say out with a caveat. I need someone to root for in the story. So if we're only following one character and that character is pretty much just evil, then I really struggle to get into stories like that. Or evil character perspectives work well in multi-POV stories where one of the characters is like really not a good person, but we can follow, like, even seeing from like multiple sides to a struggle in a fantasy book, and we see characters from both perspectives. I love that kind of stuff. So I think it can be done well. I really do, but I don't gravitate to stories where we have like, I'm gonna say an evil character or an anti-hero as your protagonist. Next is The Chosen One, and I'm going to say in with a caveat. I think we have so much we can explore with chosen ones, and I understand that like your typical chosen one might be a little overdone. So I think if we told chosen one stories, like maybe someone thinks they're the chosen one, but in the end they find out they're not, or chosen ones that don't have all the powers they need and they have to rely on a team, so maybe a team of chosen ones. I still want to read a chosen one story where the chosen one decides not to go on the quest, and we see from that character's perspective, and we see from the character's perspective of like trying to stop the evil or whatever it is. What I don't like about chosen ones is chosen ones who have all the powers and can do all the things because they're the chosen one, and we are not told in story very early on why they have these special powers and abilities. Sometimes reading stories, it's like, our protagonist is special because they're the protagonist. That's all you need to know. They're the protagonist. Of course they can do everything. That gets old very fast. Chosen ones in, but I understand why people can be annoyed by them, and I sometimes am annoyed by them. Next one is When the Protagonist Dies, which I'm in on, but again, like I said on the happy endings, I don't want all my stories to end the same way. So absolutely, I want to read stories where the protagonist dies. I want to read stories where there are stakes, where it feels like the protagonist might not make it to the end. I want that. But at the same time, if the protagonist always dies at the end of every story, then that's not going to be interesting either. So we need variety. Next is long chapters, and I pretty much explained this earlier, but I am so out on long chapters, not interested in reading long chapter stories. I will read them, don't get me wrong, I just don't prefer them. They take me so much longer to read. Next is French flaps, which I also had to look up what French flaps were. This, I'm hoping you can see this, is a French flap. I have no preference on this. I'm going to be firmly in between because I don't care if a book has a French flap or not. Next is Deckled Edges, and I am out on Deckled Edges for the same reason I'm out on drop caps. Anything that makes a book harder to read, I'm not here for. I think Deckled Edges, they look cool on the shelf, but they're not practical, and they do make turning pages harder. And I've read books with Deckled Edges where I turned 2 or 3 pages instead of just one and started reading and then was confused. It's happened so many times. Do not like Deckled Edges. Next is signed copies by the author, and I am out with a caveat. So I don't care about getting a signed copy from a bookstore, from online, etc. If I had the opportunity to meet an author and get a book signed while I was meeting the author, that would be a lot more special to me than like I ordered a book online or I found one in a bookstore with the author's signature in it. I'd almost rather like get a picture with the author, like meet the author, get a picture. It's more about the interaction to me than it is about the signature. Next is dog-eared pages, and I'm out, but I don't care what you do with your books. I am not at all horrified with books that have dog-eared pages. I just am a bookmark collector, so I have bookmarks. I have lots of bookmarks, so I always use bookmarks whenever I'm reading a physical book, so I'm very unlikely to dog-ear a page, but I don't have any problem with people dog-earing pages. Next is chapter titles instead of numbers, and I am out on this one for two reasons. First off, chapter titles that give spoilers away or that allude to something even if it doesn't seem spoilery, but then we find out about it halfway through the chapter, or you go, oh, I remember the chapter title's this, so then you like figure it out halfway through the chapter. Dislike that. Other thing I dislike about chapter titles is audiobooks that have chapter titles. I feel like it breaks the story up and breaks the flow of the story, and I would rather just hear chapter 10 and then continue on, because that doesn't break the flow of the story as much. So out on chapter titles. There you have it. That is the in or out tag. I hope this was interesting for you. Let me know if you really disagree on anything that I said in the comments. And you are tagged if you want to be tagged. If I did not tag you in the beginning, but you want to do this, go for it, and happy reading.